Hello everyone, it's Andy Sherritt here from ITHealth. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for your punctuality. It's 2 o'clock exactly. If you don't mind, I'm just going to kind of pause this for another minute or so. We can see there's a number of people still joining, so I'll be back with you in just a moment. Hello again everyone, hopefully you can all hear me okay. It's Andy Sherritt here from ITHealth. Thanks for hanging on there, we just had a few people that were still joining. So yeah, thanks again for joining us. I know you're all probably pretty busy, so we appreciate your time. It's Andy Sherritt, as I said, from ITHealth. Recognise some names that are on the webinar today, so hopefully quite a few of you will know me anyway. I'm joined today by my co-hosts Jonathan Lee and Roger Neal from Sophos. We're going to be presenting today's webinar entitled Protecting Windows 10 within the NHS. Hi Roger, hi Jonathan.
Good afternoon, Andy. Afternoon, Andy.
Thank you guys. So kind of a few minor bits of housekeeping before we start. Firstly, we do have a feedback survey at the end of this, so as the webinar finishes, please do fill that in. That's really helpful for us to guide the next round of webinars. Secondly, we are recording this, so we will make available to you the recording shortly after the webinar. And finally, questions. We do like and encourage your questions, so please use the panel on the right-hand side to post these. I'll monitor them throughout the webinar, and we'll come back to them and answer as many as we can at the end of the session. Also, time allowing after the Sophos presentation and the questions, I will show you a very brief overview of our assurance dashboard. Again, some of you on the line will be familiar with that, but it does fit in quite nicely with the agenda around sort of removing complexity and reducing your administration burden within cybersecurity. So that's it for me for now. I'll pick up again with your questions at the end, but over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Andy. So as Andy mentioned, presenting for Sophos this afternoon will be me, so I'm the UK Healthcare Sector Manager. Again, like Andy, I think I know a lot of you on the call, recognise quite a lot of names. And I'm joined by my colleague Roger Neal, who, amongst other things, is our Technology Services Manager. And he's going to be running through a little bit later on about our server protection and endpoint detection and response capabilities. But without further ado, we'll crack on. There's quite a lot to fit in here. As Andy mentioned a second ago, we'd really welcome your questions, so please pop those into that chat window and then we'll answer those at the end.
Sorry, hang on.
So apologies, the slides failed to,
yeah, we'll just
start.
We'll just
Give
get
me
the
1
slides
second.
moving.
Thank you very much, Andy. So yeah, the agenda really is to talk about understanding security in the age of Windows 10. So following on from the NHS Digital Windows 10 deal that was done, which included you having to use, well, to get your free licenses anyway, Defender ATP, and we'll look at kind of what that means, etc. But of course, security is more than just defending Windows 10, and the security of your trust is more about your overall infrastructure. And so we'll talk a little bit about the strategy that you can put in place to make sure that you're fit now, not just for now, but also for the future as things develop and medical devices come more into play, that kind of thing. And as part of that, we'll talk about a multi-layered approach, so defense in depth, as it perhaps used to be called. And the things that we'll cover within that are such as looking at simplicity versus complexity to avoid unnecessary risk, both from a technical and also a clinical means. We'll talk about automation of protection, so where there's not many of you to your users as IT administrators, how you can use our products to help you out there to provide automated protection. We'll talk about servers, I mentioned a minute ago, in clinical systems. We'll look at some of the key compliance drivers behind what we're doing in terms of security strategy. Touch on total cost of ownership, and then talk about how you get help when you need it. And then at the end, we've got some questions that maybe you can ask yourselves and your trusts, really, when you're looking at your cybersecurity strategy, as well as obviously taking your specific questions at that point in time. So when we started looking at this topic, it was about a year ago, so following on from the NHS buying the Windows 10 licenses in May. At that time, the NHS was 70, and this fitted quite nicely into our presentation. We've just tipped over into the 71st birthday, so I've had to tweak my slide here, but rest assured, I think the NHS is a wholly different place to it was 71 years ago. So the slide on the left here shows the Trafford General when the NHS was set up, all the celebrations around that. But now the way that patient care is delivered is obviously completely different, and technology plays a big part in that. So lots more people caring for people in the community, mobile devices and the likes of ambulances, etc. We all know that care settings have changed, and technology has become more and more important as time's gone on. So gone are the days when you've got clinicians looking at X-rays such as this, and we now rely on things like digital imaging and obviously all the connected technology that goes with that, which is fantastic. But when it comes to actually doing that when there's been a cyber attack, obviously that causes issues. So we'll all be aware of the chap at the top left-hand corner here, Matt Hancock, who at the moment at least, until the whole range of politics plays out in the next few weeks, is the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. And his big thing is to do with technology in healthcare. And I guess one of the drivers for that was the wash-up from the WannaCry incident that happened in May 2017. There's been a lot of investment by the likes of NHS Digital, such as the Windows 10 deal, for example. But there is also still a lot to do, as I'm sure you'll agree. But we've also got other key players now that are providing advice across the health and care sector and broader than that as well. So the likes of the National Cyber Security Centre, so part of GCHQ, but also Matt Hancock's, invention really, NHSX, so the NHS experience body that aims to provide a better experience for patients and clinicians through the use of technology. All of that's great, but obviously we need to focus on how we can do that in a secure manner, and kind of part of that is what we'll cover today. So I think before looking at how we actually go about securing devices and looking at Windows 10, we really need to take a step back and realise that cybersecurity is now crucial for patient safety. So I talked a couple of minutes ago about how the likes of imaging and diagnostics are key in treating patients in the right way. But what happens if you had an interruption in that service, as shown here in the centre of the screen with the WannaCry outbreak? And WannaCry is obviously only one example of the kinds of threats that we see being faced by the NHS and other healthcare organisations on a day-to-day basis. But the threat's now broader than that. We've seen in the news over the past few weeks attacks which at the moment are theoretical but have been proven in a lab to be possible, but could certainly get out into the wild at some point soon. So we had things like the anaesthetic devices which were vulnerable to hackers, and things like medical implants such as inbuilt defibrillators and things like that can all be subject to attack from the outside. So patient safety is very much now impacted by the cybersecurity that you put around your network and your devices and your subnets, etc. So it's key that we take this seriously, and key that boards take that seriously, which is why at Sophos we'd really welcome the GCHQ accredited training that NHS Digital is providing for your boards to raise cybersecurity awareness, etc. but obviously we need to put the technical measures in place as well alongside that to make sure that you're secure. So if we take a look back at why the Windows 10 deal happened, it was really the perfect storm to create funding, to bring funding to be available from the Cabinet Office at the time. So we had the WannaCry outbreak, where there wasn't a great deal of visibility as to what was happening at a local, regional or national level from NHS Digital. And then we had all of the news around Windows XP, which had absolutely nothing to do with WannaCry, but was a convenient thing to pin to that at the same time, which created budget to be able to go and upgrade the NHS's operating system licenses to Windows 10. So it was kind of like the perfect storm which created that budget to become available. But I think we should ask ourselves at that point, there was obviously a hole there was obviously a security hole, but what hole were we trying to fix? And were we trying to fix the right hole, or have we left gaps really in the cybersecurity strategy? I'd argue we had, because one of the things that this didn't cover was any protection around servers. And my colleague Roger will cover that in a little bit more detail in a little while. So obviously the agreement came into play. It was Bytes Technology Group that obviously won the contract with NHS Digital to, in theory, upgrade the NHS to Windows 10 across the board. So let's take a look at that in a little bit more detail. You're probably all aware that the agreement includes Microsoft's Windows E5 agreement on a subscription basis until the 30th of April 2023. So it's key to point out that that's on a subscription, and that the boards of trusts have been asked to put this on their risk register in terms of the funding in case this doesn't get renewed after 2023. As part of that, in order to get the free licenses, you're mandated to use the Defender ATP product from Microsoft, which is part of their broader security stack. And that sits right at the end of the attack chain, as we'll see throughout this presentation. We'll include a bit more information on that in a minute. It also included free use of BitLocker, Microsoft's encryption tool. So we're starting to see some trusts rolling that out to all of their workstations as well as laptops. And Sophos has a very elegant way of managing that, but yeah, included BitLocker. And the key thing that NHS Digital were keen to point out, so Peter Dyke and his colleagues in Leeds, they were very keen to point out that you could continue to run your existing antivirus or endpoint security tools, such as Sophos, and then complement those with the Defender ATP product from Microsoft, the bit you were mandated to use. So what is ATP, and what's Sophos' Intercept X Advanced, which now comes with an Endpoint Detection and Response component? Well, ATP itself is primarily an EDR tool, so an Endpoint Detection and Response tool, which was licensed by NHS Digital as part of this agreement. So the aim of ATP is to look at how Windows should
picking up on this slide. What is Defender ATP and Sophos Intercept X? So,
hello, sorry, there's some. Hello, apologies. There's some feedback on the line. Was someone asking a question there?
No, I was just adding some content, John.
Okay. Sorry, Roger. Do you want to interject?
Yeah, I was just saying that Windows Defender ATP, there's a lot of information around in the marketplace about it, but one thing that we want to be really clear about is it's what we term as a endpoint detection and response tool, which allows you to look at what's happened in an attack rather than actually helping to stop the attack. So again, we could talk about this in a couple of slides a bit further along, but it's very much aimed at that last line of defense, which is where Sophos Intercept X can be used in front of it to actually prevent the malware getting into the environment to start with.
Thanks, Roger. That's great. Apologies. I thought it was someone else asking a question. I do apologise, but no, that's great to set the context for that. So yeah, that is really that last line of defence. So it's the kind of anomalies, isn't it, Roger, that we're looking for through ATP or even the Sophos EDR. But the aim really is through Sophos' Intercept X Advanced technology, which is a combination of the kind of traditional techniques from Sophos and then the next generation techniques through Intercept X. The aim is to stop most of those breaches from happening in the first place, or those alerts, so that anything that you do see in either the Sophos EDR tool or ATP is real stuff that you can then manage, rather than sort of creating a lot of noise. Would you have anything to add on that, Roger?
No, I agree with you on that.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, if we look back again at the aims of NHS Digital then, so this is Rob Shaw, the Deputy Chief Executive of NHS Digital, who talked about the extra funding being used to add additional layers of protection, but also giving that visibility that we talked about earlier, so that if something like WannaCry did happen, they would know what was going on out there in the wild, rather than having to contact vendors like Sophos and our competitors to see who'd reported incidents to us. But at the same time, although this I guess range of tools included some broader Microsoft security tools, we've got the likes of the SANS Institute talking about the fact that the infrastructure shouldn't be allowed to protect itself. Whilst it makes sense to have Windows 10 being a more secure operating system than Windows 7 or XP before that, obviously you really don't want to rely on the infrastructure itself to guard against those vulnerabilities that come up from time to time. And we'll see how many vulnerabilities there actually are there out in the wild in a slide or two's time. So really we need to focus on making sure that we build layered protection around a better operating system that's been provided by NHS Digital, with that kind of fail-safe mechanism of ATP in the background. So Sophos and Microsoft, in terms of the ATP component and Intercept X Advanced, work very nicely together. So we've now got 12, 15 months of these products working together out there across the NHS. So back at the beginning, back in May of last year, when this agreement came out, we did a lot of work with the early adopter trusts in terms of testing these things at the same time, so side by side, and we found absolutely no conflicts or anything like that at all. Indeed, we've got a case study on the top right-hand corner here from a customer called City Healthcare. There's also a video as well where they talk about their experience of using these two products side by side. There's also another case study about to come out from another one of our customers at Surrey and Borders Partnership, who talk about these things working very well together. They also talk about Cyber Essentials Plus, which is something we'll talk about in a few slides' time as well. So these two things very much work together and are very, very complementary. So in terms of the strategy that we'd advocate around security, the first thing we'd ask you to look at is defense in depth, or layered security, I guess. And layered security is something that both the National Cyber Security Centre and NHS Digital both advocate, by having multiple layers of technology and detection, protection and reactive techniques as well. You have better protection against day zero threats and threats that are already out there. So it increases your overall security strategy and of the whole system when you put in layered security. And there are multiple layers that you as Sophos customers benefit from, which we'll see in a slide in a couple of slides' time. And should anything happen then, ATP then enables a rapid response, and then Sophos can clean anything up if anything needs to be cleaned up. So defense in depth is very much something that you should be looking at within your cybersecurity policy. I talked about the number of security vulnerabilities within Windows 10. So we checked this yesterday, and up to yesterday there were 933 separate vulnerabilities in Windows 10 this year alone. And you can see there that there were more vulnerabilities in the first 5 months of this year than there were in the whole of last year. You get the idea, the vulnerabilities are growing. So we need ways to protect against the exploits that are there and open to malware writers to stop these threats from impacting your Windows 10 machines. And that's where the likes of the Intercept X component from Sophos comes in, as we look for those exploits being used to attack you. I also mentioned that we'd show you the attack chain as well. So this slide here very much covers sort of the attack surface, so where threats can come in from, and then looks at the pre and post-execution phases of an attack, and then looks at how you can go about finding out what's happened if something gets through. So with Sophos on the top line there, you've got multiple ways of stopping a threat from coming in. First, by looking at who can plug what in, so peripheral control or device control. Looking at what applications you can use, so cutting the use of tools that might only be appropriate for IT, for example. Looking at where people can go from a web filtering point of view, or whether they can go to sites based on whether that website has been compromised or not, etc., etc. There's a whole plethora of different techniques that you can use as part of the Sophos portfolio, meaning that anything that gets through to the ATP component should be something that you need to look at. One of the areas that is mentioned there right in the middle of the screen is our deep learning file scanning. So deep learning is a type of artificial intelligence that Sophos uses within its products to effectively look what malware looks like without the need for a human analyst. So it provides fantastic day zero protection when we're looking at new malware that's out there in the wild. If something does get through and it does run, say for example like a WannaCry style attack, we then have our CryptoGuard technology, and for something like NotPetya, we have the WhiteGuard technology, both of which stop those two threats in their tracks. So you can see there's multiple layers of technology there that we have in place to stop malware getting onto your network in the first place. And then if anything does get through, we also have the Sophos EDR technology, which Roger will talk about in a little while, to model where that's coming from and the lessons we need to learn to stop it from happening in the future, not just on your workstations, but also on your servers, something which is not covered by the Windows 10 agreement. The next thing I'd like to move on to is the kind of often overlooked area of how easy the products are to manage. So we know, like I mentioned earlier, that the ratio of you as administrators to users in the NHS is way out of kilter with, say, an investment bank, for example. So having something which is very easy to use and something that is deployed to best practice and you can roll out new functionality very easily is absolutely critical in your environment. And that then avoids any kind of risk around network downtime and not being able to use those diagnostic tools that we talked about before. And this sort of strategy has always been what Sophos has been very good at. So we've always strived to have very easy to manage technology which provides very in-depth security. There's also an interesting blog that I came across the other day that kind of backs this up, something from the National Cyber Security Centre, where they talk about poor usability often equaling poor security. So, you need tools that are very easy to manage to be able to deploy security properly so it doesn't just become shelfware, for example. They also talk about training your users, something that we'll talk about on the next slide in relation to WannaCry. The fact that users are really key to protecting your network. But usability and ease of use is really key when creating a security strategy. The kind of wash-up report of WannaCry that I mentioned a minute ago, the report written by Will Smart, the then CIO of NHS England, talked about the complexity of the environments which many of you find yourselves, interconnected networks, lots of different applications that you've got to support, and the fact that there'd been insufficient investment in technology to enable you to have the best defences. At the same time, it also called out the lack of training in cybersecurity, etc. All of these things are really key, and I know NHS Digital has put a lot of effort into trying to train boards, like I mentioned earlier, but there's still more to do, in my opinion, and we need to do things like phishing simulation, and we need to do regular training. But, the complex environment needs a simple solution, and that's really how Sophos can help you, really. I mentioned complexity is the enemy of security. We really do believe it causes additional risk to an organisation, and in fact, lots of people that have moved to Sophos from our competitors have moved because they've found those particular tools are difficult to manage. They might tick a lot of boxes if you did a paper exercise as part of a tender or something, but they've found that they can't really use those particular bits of functionality or can't configure them easily. So Sophos really aims to keep you better protected by being simple to configure and manage just out of the box without very little involvement from you. We very much see it as part of our remit or responsibility to make sure that you're protected rather than you having to do a lot of that work yourselves. We also really aim to make the console very, very easy to manage compared to other manufacturers' tools. And for those of you that use the Sophos Central tool, you know that it's a kind of one single pane of glass tool that sort of integrates all of our technologies in there, and that really does reduce the risk of misconfiguration and the risk of infection for you as NHS organisations. And obviously, as we know, that if anything does slip through, that's where the Defender ATP component will come in and help you do the forensics, or you could use the Sophos EDR tool at that point. So in terms of the Sophos Central Console, for those of you that haven't seen it, it looks like this. And this slide here just shows you some of the configurations that can be put into place to provide the best levels of protection, all from one screen. And you can also just slide a radio button across which says adhere to best practice. And so if anything changes, Sophos feeds that through to your network and keeps you better protected. So we believe that provides you with the peace of mind that the people within Sophos labs are watching your back at all times and keeping you well protected, and it cuts down that risk of misconfiguration. We can really contrast that as well with one of the other products that people look at, so the broader Microsoft suite. where just to manage the same kind of functionality, you would need to use 6, 7 different consoles. And the question I want to ask you at that point is, how easy would it be in that world to get a centralized view of all your security in one place? And that's something that people have looked at through testing different technologies and realised that Sophos provides that nice visibility into the state of your network and your user and what devices they're using and whether they are nice and secure. Moving on to the next area, we'll talk about automated protection. So I talked about WannaCry in May 2017, and that hit at lunchtime on a Friday. Lots of people were out at lunch, etc. I remember it well. And we started getting people asking as well, have you seen anything going around in the wild? Is there anything you know about at that precise moment in time? These were people that had our Intercept X product installed, and the malware was being stopped as it tried to encrypt files on the network, all being rolled back. But what if you had an automated system in place at that point in time, which not only stopped those files from being encrypted and locking you out of your machine, but also could help to stop the spread of that across your network, help to stop users going out to the internet, talking to peers on their particular subnet. But that's where something called synchronized security from Sophos comes in. So synchronized security is our framework, I guess, that binds together all of the different products that we have, and uses our firewall technology to block access out to the internet, out onto HSCN, M3, etc., and also helps to stop the spread on the subnet as well by isolating the machine. And this is key really when we think about the number of threats that we see out there received by Sophos Labs every single day. So somewhere in the region of 400 to 500,000 new threats that we see every single day, unique pieces of malware that hit our labs that need to be looked at and looked at by our artificial intelligence. So having automation of that protection if you see a day zero threat is absolutely crucial. And as I say, that's where synchronized security comes into play. So we know that point products often stop an attack at one particular area, but they're not aware of the context of what's happening at the other area of the network. So for example, the endpoint's not aware of what the firewall's doing or vice versa. But synchronized security joins all that together and enables the endpoints to talk to the firewall, and then they can take action based on that information that they are seeing out there. So it really helps you as overstretched IT staff to automatically manage that response to a new threat. And this has all been backed up by Gartner, who very much think this is the way forward, a systematic approach to security where you can trigger scans based on something that the endpoint's told you or something you've seen at the network, etc. So it's something that Sophos has had out for some time now. It's becoming more and more popular as people look to automate a lot of the response to this. So what does it look like in reality? So this diagram here shows you a typical Sophos setup. So you've got your endpoint technology there, the Intercept X Advanced technology, and you've got one of our XG firewalls sitting in the network out towards the internet. We'll talk about the ways that you can use the firewall in a minute. So if you've got next generation firewalls already and you're thinking, I don't want to replace my firewall, there are other ways of deploying this, but just bear with me for one more slide. So all of our endpoints on the network have like a security status, so something called the security heartbeat. So basically they have a green, amber or red status. So green obviously means everything's good, so they can connect out to the internet, to resources on their network, etc. But should one of those machines become infected, obviously that becomes red. Our XG firewall gets to find out that there's a system at risk, but more importantly, that machine is then isolated from being able to connect out onto the internet to the servers because it's going through the firewall here, but also from its peers on that subnet as well by isolating that machine. Then the automated response cleans that machine up, the threat's cleared, and then it goes back to normal again. So the green status means it can then connect to the other machines, the servers, the internet, etc. All in an automated way, and all of which often takes a fraction of a second. So you're just very much better protected by using that systematic approach to security. The other thing I mentioned was, for those of you that have already invested in next generation firewalls, you don't have to replace the next gen firewalls that you've already got in place to put this system in place with the XG firewall. There are other ways that you can do it. Of course, Sophos does have a fully featured next generation firewall, should you wish to put that at the front of your network stack. But you can also put this as what we call an enforcement box. behind your existing firewall, so the inline model that's here in the middle of the screen, whereby it just stops access out to the internet or to other subnets that are passing through that particular device. So there are various ways that you can achieve this, but it certainly makes that sort of control and automation piece far easier. The next area that we're going to talk about is protecting the servers in clinical systems. And before I pass over to Roger to talk about this area, just to sort of set the scene, I mean, we all know that servers are where your most critical data actually resides, and we don't need the Verizon data breach report to tell us that. But really, I think what we need to realise is that the NHS Digital deal didn't include any protection or extra protection for servers. So, you know, any Windows Server operating systems weren't included within that. So there's no ATP for the servers, which is where Sophos' EDR technology becomes even more important. So, Roger, I'll pass over to you just to talk through what Sophos can do around servers. Okay?
Cool. Thanks, John. Can you hear me all right?
We can, yeah.
Cool. Brilliant. So, just to set the scene, from a lot of the attacks we're seeing at the minute, what we're finding is most bad guys are coming into a network either through unprotected RDP connections, so remote desktop services that you might be offering out to your users and partners within the community, or through attacking users through phishing attacks, so spear phishing, targeted phishing, to get a user to open an attachment, which can then subsequently infect a machine, or visit a compromised website. And again, being able to provide protections at the email and web gateway is absolutely critical, as well as working with the firewall as part of a solution that works together. The goal of the bad guys is to basically get to the servers. So what they will do is they'll compromise a user machine. They will then try to scrape administrator credentials off that machine to then move laterally, as Jonathan showed in the diagram earlier, across into the server estate. So why attack the servers? So the servers are seen as high-value targets by the bad guys. Within an NHS context, that's because they contain valuable patient information. So it could be names, addresses, contact details, medical diagnosis, basically information that's worth money to somebody else. The servers also contain staff information. So it could be your HR system, it could be annual leave notes, it could be anything. But that sort of information is like gold dust to the bad guys. The other things that they also realise is that if they take your servers down, it's certainly in the NHS environment, it's going to stop medical procedures, it's going to stop operations, it's going to stop patient treatment, it's going to stop sharing of information between doctors and surgeries, doctors and hospitals, between groups themselves. I mean, myself and John were in London yesterday at an NHS Digital event where they were talking about integrating pharmacist systems into other pharmacist systems. And again, you take that down and you're suddenly finding that a hospital can't prescribe medicines out to patients and things like that. It's going to absolutely cripple the hospital. And also, the other reason why servers are seen as a slightly easier target is because people don't like patching them. And they're quite happy to patch desktops, but they tend to be more cautious about patching servers for the latest patches, so they might only get rebooted once a month, once every couple of months to apply the patches. So again, from a bad guy's perspective, once they've been compromised, they're going to stay compromised for a lot longer than potentially an endpoint is. Next slide, please, John. So, as I touched on earlier, endpoint detection and response, it's an interesting term that's quite new to certainly the UK market. But what it is, it's a set of tools and a process. So it's different to an endpoint protection product. It's a set of tools on how you identify forensically, potentially, what's gone on a device, and then look within the estate to see whether that's happened somewhere else, and then allows you then to provide the interesting reporting from a GDPR perspective or a compliance report into NIST or things like that, where you've got to know who's been impacted, where it came from, what happened, why. And again, this kind of harks back to some of that user training piece that John talked about earlier, because again, EDR is quite useful for actually user training. So in this screenshot below is a quick example that we've taken from one of our simulated EDR events. So in this case, we've got a PC, and again, you've got the IP address, so you can know where to go look on the network for it. In this case, the user's opened Outlook. Within that, obviously, they've opened an email with an attachment on, which in this case is called badthing.exe. In this case, our Sophos endpoint system then detected the malware at 5:46 a.m. What we then did is then proactively blocked the machine and carried out a forensic deep clean of that device to make sure that any trace of that malware has been removed. What EDR then allows you to do is take the information from that event, so badthing.exe, you can take the file information, and then you can hunt across the estate for it to look to see whether it's been potentially emailed to somebody else within the environment. You can then do analysis on what's actually the content of that file. You can look at things like VirusTotal if you want to, or you can ask Sophos Labs, certainly within the Sophos EDR platform, for more information, and we will go and provide a report on exactly what that file does, what it looks like, so again, helping you get better information on what's actually happened. So again, as I said, EDR is very much a toolkit, and from our perspective, we're trying to make it as intuitive as possible. Other vendors enjoy making it as complicated as possible. Next slide, please, John. So as a kind of high level, EDR allows you to proactively hunt down attacks that have happened to see whether they're anywhere else within the environment, which allows you to put some context around what's happened within that security incident. It allows you to look at, certainly within the Sophos platform, we don't care whether the servers are on-premise or hosted in AWS or Azure public cloud. So again, a lot of the NHS Digital push at the minute is to their internet first strategy, and the Sophos solutions, including Sophos EDR and also our Cloud Optics platform, allow you to gain insight and protection within the AWS, Azure and Google platforms. So if you do move part of your data center up onto those platforms, you can actually make sure that they're fully protected and secured against intrusion. One of the other things that is also applicable as part of the synchronized security is synchronized application control. It was on one of John's slides earlier, but one of the things that we're finding, and I guess you guys are seeing as well, is more and more network traffic within your estate going out onto N3 or HSCN or out onto the internet is encrypted. And it's not just SSL encrypted, it's potentially certificate pin encrypted. So man in the middle or traditional web proxies find it increasingly difficult to actually analyze what that traffic is. Sophos synchronized application control uses the security heartbeat between the endpoint and the next generation firewall system to be able to allow the firewall to ask the endpoint that's originating the encrypted traffic, what is it? What process is actually creating this? And then based off that, we can then block unknown applications from communicating outwards. So it could be a machine that's been compromised and being used for command and control. It could be a remote access Trojan, something like that. Or it could be a new version of some web browser that you're using within the NHS, or web application, in which case you go onto the firewall and allow it, and it will then instantly be allowed across your estate again. But synchronized application control and that visibility into that encrypted network traffic, we did a study earlier in the year, just to put some scale on it, somewhere between 80 and 90% of all network traffic is now encrypted, which is why you need that presence on the endpoint, talking to your firewalls and your web proxies to actually be able to identify and read what's going on within that message flow. Next slide, please, Jonathan. The other thing that I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about is all EDR products are not the same. So if you kind of look at the market as it sits, the Sophos philosophy for trying to make endpoint detection and response as intuitive and easy as possible is fundamental to the way our Intercept X on endpoints and servers works. But if you then compare it to other EDR platforms, where the idea is to allow the good known stuff, or benign as it is on this slide, block the malicious stuff, and then you have this grey space in the middle. And from a Sophos perspective, we try to make that grey space as little as possible. But other solutions effectively put the onus on you and your IT teams to work out what's actually going on. So if we pick up some, or Defender or another EDR solution picks up a strange going on an endpoint, it then puts you and your team, effectively the onus is now on you to work it out. So between you and your team, you've got to become the security analyst to work out what's happened, the malware analyst to then go and work out what the malware is actually doing, and the threat analyst to say, okay, well, is this something that I need to scan the entire estate for, or can I just chalk it down as a compromised website and the users hit it by a drive-by? But it puts a lot of the onus on you and your stretched teams to do all this work. And again, within the NHS, you've got a small team, you've flat out supporting your environments you're already working to, so you want a solution that gives you this information on one platform. You don't want to be hopping between different dashboards, you don't want to be hopping between different management consoles, different policies, working out whether something's written in an Intune policy or whether it's an AD group policy. You want to actually be able to analyze this stuff really quickly. And that's, again, a lot of the philosophy behind the Sophos solution. Next slide, please, John. So, intelligent EDR. Again, we provide a cross-platform EDR solution. So, again, we don't care whether it's an endpoint, be it running Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10, or running various server operating systems. It's exactly the same level of support, and again, the same level of protection through our Intercept X functionality. But from our view, if the bad stuff isn't coming in and your endpoint platform is then stopping it, it means you have to spend less time within the EDR part of your remit. So in this case, EDR starts with the strongest protection. You guys don't have a big IT team, so if we can automate the response, give you guided incident workflows so that we can guide you through what to do next, be it hunt through the estate, or whether it's to clean, whether it's to quarantine machines off a network, do all that through one simple workflow. Again, it means that you've got more time to do other things, which is the absolute fundamental belief from Sophos is we want to make the solution to provide the best protection we can. And if there is anything that you need to analyze, we want to make your lives as easy as possible. And that's very much the philosophy. Next slide, Jonathan. So again, as I said, a whole defense in depth strategy is absolutely critical. You need to be able to protect in as many different places, be it on your network and on the endpoint devices themselves. You need to be able to use the best protection in the industry. So again, look at independent tests when you're evaluating endpoint solutions. Look at 4 or 5 different independent tests and not just one. You want to pick the vendor that comes out top most often. You want to be able to stop advanced malware, and this also includes the user training pieces we touched on earlier. Be able to teach the users how to spot dodgy attachments in emails or potentially links to dodgy websites is absolutely fundamental for a security strategy within any environment. Catch evasive threats. So patch when you can, use intrusion prevention systems on your network, but also look at things like device control, peripheral control, because malware can spread just as quickly through a USB key or potentially a compromised mobile phone being plugged into a computer as it can as over your network. Lock down your servers. So things like server lockdown functionality within the endpoint, within the server platform that we use, or file integrity monitoring allows you to lock down the servers to stop unauthorized scripts running. And again, if you can stop the unauthorized scripts running, it means the bad guys can't get onto the machines and they can't compromise your data. So again, as we touched on earlier, Intercept X for server is hybrid cloud ready. From our perspective, we don't care whether the server is a physical server, a virtual server, or even running in public cloud like Azure, AWS, or GCP. We want to provide the same level of protection, the same policy workflow, the same reporting, the same experience to you guys, and that's absolutely fundamental to the belief of Sophos.
That's great, thank you, Roger. So, other areas to think about are your vendors' focus on cybersecurity. So at Sophos, cybersecurity is all that we do, and we do it extremely well. This is very much validated by third-party results. So Gartner Magic Quadrant leader in the endpoint space for many, many, many years, as well as the UTM, i.e. the next-gen firewall space as well. So really having a credible cybersecurity partner is something that obviously we'd advocate to Sophos, but we think is really important to you. The Sophos mission really is to be the best in the world at delivering, as it says here, innovative, simple, and highly effective cybersecurity solutions, not just to you as IT security professionals, but to our partners such as ITHealth that help to support you and work with you on a day-to-day basis to keep you secure. And that really is at the very centre of everything that we do. And that's led to us being, like I mentioned, not just a leader in terms of Gartner and the Magic Quadrants, etc., but also a leader in the NHS in terms of security as well. So Sophos has got more than 30 years of working with you and your colleagues in the NHS. We've got obviously a portfolio of products, not just the ones we're talking about here today, but we protect over 80% of NHS machines across the UK in some way, shape or form. And that's from organisations of all sizes really, from the smallest GP site right up to the biggest commissioning support units. So we've got experience across all of these different subsectors of the NHS, and ITHealth very much partner with us in that to support you and your colleagues and keep you secure. The other things to think about are achieving compliance. We're seeing a lot more by way of trying to push you towards proving your compliance with things like Cyber Essentials Plus, obviously that now becoming mandatory, the well-led section of the CQC inspections, the DSPT and the NIS directive as well. All of these things are driving you more towards making sure that you can prove that you're secure and that you're compliant to these regulations. And I know Andy's going to talk to you in a little while about the ITHealth dashboard, which helps you with things like CareCert compliance, for example. All of these things are really, really important. And Sophos integrates really nicely with the ITHealth dashboard to provide you with that information. So Sophos very much helps in that area together with our colleagues at ITHealth. The other thing, though, that I'd like to draw your attention to is looking at the total cost of ownership of a cybersecurity system or cybersecurity products. I think we're not that good really in the NHS at valuing people's time. I think people just do things and on a best endeavours basis. And I think we need to start to look at the time spent managing these solutions and what you're getting by way of protection from that time spent. So obviously I would argue that having one console, that sort of one pane of glass to be able to manage everything from, would make your lives much, much easier and help you to be more secure through being able to, I guess, implement those policies in a much more easy and straightforward manner rather than looking at multiple consoles where you're not quite sure whether the settings are right, etc. It just means you're more secure in that environment. And you'll get a copy of the slides after this, but I just published a blog post yesterday which asks you to look about the total cost of ownership equation when your budgets are getting tighter but you need to be more and more secure. So we'll send you a link to that following on from this webinar. Final thing to think about really is what do you do if something goes wrong? So how do you get help when you need it? Are you going to be put into talking to a generalist who's supporting multiple different products, not even security products, it might be productivity products, those kind of things. But at Sophos and ITHealth, we've got the help there when you need it to help provide you with that support. And I'm sure Andy will be able to tell you more about the ITHealth support offerings as well, but many of our joint customers have those in place. And it means, again, you can just pick up the phone and talk to ITHealth when you've got any questions, however big or small, and that also helps you to remain better protected. Just before we take your questions, there are some questions that I would ask you to ask yourselves when it comes to cybersecurity and your policy. So first and foremost, how do you get a centralized snapshot of all your security in one place? Is it very easy to prove compliance if you've got an outbreak, or if you've got users that are proving to be risky for the environment? How do you centrally manage the policies? Is it an easy thing to do to change a policy so you adhere to best practice? How do you protect your Mac and Linux machines that aren't covered by the Windows agreement? Do your security tools all work together? So do they work together as a system to provide better protection, but also visibility so that you can respond to any incidents that you see out there? How many people, amongst the very few IT administrators that you have in your organisation, have the expertise to be able to pick things up and to be able to customise and roll out every feature should someone be away on holiday or off sick and that kind of thing? So this comes back to ease of use and how intuitive the system is, I guess. And how would you cope with many, many consoles to manage? Would that create risk in your organisation? And then, I guess last of all, really, just as I mentioned, really, who will you contact if you have a problem? So on this call, obviously, you'd be able to contact Sophos and ITHealth, who'd be able to help you out with those things. So I hope you found the presentation useful in terms of making you think about kind of what's there, what you're being asked to do by NHS Digital, the background to the NHS Windows 10 agreement, what the future may look like, thinking about things like protecting medical devices, servers, and hopefully how Sophos and ITHealth can help you to become better protected in that environment. So I think what we'd like to do now is to sort of take any questions that you may have.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan and Roger. Very interesting and relevant. So, yeah, we've got a couple of questions. Are you able to answer one of those? Or?
Yep, that'd be great. So we can see the questions here. So I think the first one, Roger, is for you. So you mentioned about the EDR functionality, Endpoint Detection and Response, and we talked about ATP and Sophos, and you said that there were differences between the approaches that some EDR technologies have and then Sophos EDR. Are you able to elaborate on that a little bit? Someone's asked.
Yeah, so certainly from a Sophos perspective, we've come at it from a try to do as much as we can automatically, to mean you don't have to do something, and kind of take the approach of tell you when you need to look at something rather than just generate lots of background noise. And again, it's working out what's the legitimate or a proper thing you need to go and investigate and spend your time looking at, rather than looking at lots of alerts from, I don't know, Google Chrome, as an example, where it generates lots of noise about various types of things, but that's more down to the way that Chrome works itself. So we've kind of tried to take the approach that you don't need a security analyst, a malware analyst, and a threat analyst to work all this stuff out. We can do it automatically using some machine learning or deep learning, as Jonathan talked about earlier, which will then automate the approach, and it will then give you a guided incident response, so that we can help step you through what you need to do to work out whether something's actually happened or not. Again, using the ability to quarantine machines off the network, hunt across the estate, whether it's a Windows workstation or Windows server, we can do the whole lot in the same workflow, is significantly different to the way that many other EDR vendors in the industry have actually approached it. So if you look at some of the other vendors, you effectively need a whole team of people to go forensically analyse what's happened, to then work out whether it was a false alarm or whether it was actually a legitimate event that's occurred. And you guys just don't have the time or the size of a team to do that. So we've come at it very much from a different angle of trying to help where possible.
That's great. Thank you, Roger. There's one more, I think this is also probably for you. You mentioned about visibility in the public cloud, and someone's asked for a bit more information on that. They said that they're looking at putting some of their services into the public cloud and possibly some of their servers as well. So could you provide a bit more information on that, please?
Sure. So one of the things that a lot of people need to think about moving to public cloud is certainly starting off with is the topology you set up within your virtual private cloud environment, and look very closely at the shared responsibility models from both Amazon and AWS, through AWS and Microsoft through Azure, to see which bits of the protection you are responsible for. So again, you've got to almost treat your virtual VPC as a data center that you guys own and run, and you've got to think about patching. You've got to think about network security to it. You need to think about what servers or services you put up there and how you protect them, and whether you need a web application firewall, whether they're using VPNs to connect to them. And this is again where Sophos endpoint protection on the servers will provide the anti-malware and the EDR piece, but you also need to think about a monitoring tool like Optics, where you can actually look at your instances across different public cloud setups and look to see where you're following compliance policies, where your teams are following good IT security best practice on building new servers or services, and then potentially nudging them back into compliance against things like GDPR or NIS or ISO 27001 and whatever. And this is certainly where Optics is a big help, and it layers across whether you're using Amazon, Azure or Google Cloud.
That's great. Thank you, Roger. If anyone needs any more information on that, just obviously contact us after the webinar today. So I think that's it for questions from a Sophos perspective. I'm going to pass over to Andy now, just to talk a little bit about the ITHealth dashboard.
So thanks, Jonathan and Roger, for that. As I sort of promised you at the start, I've just got a very sort of sneak peek at our assurance dashboard. It does fit in quite nicely, because this is all about looking a little bit wider for that assurance piece, just to make sure that some of those tools that we've talked about today are kind of doing what they should be doing, and trying to reduce some of your admin burden whilst increasing visibility. So normally have an hour for this. I'm going to just literally give you a very brief overview in a couple of minutes. Conscious that some of you on the call still may already even have the dashboard or have seen it before, so I won't be offended if you drop off, but I'll take you through it briefly anyway. So really what the dashboard delivers is that overall visibility and assurance around your level of cyber compliance in the estate. What it gets away from is this very complex management piece that you see the diagram here. This is an example of an endpoint management sort of capability, and rather than having all of these different tools to actually get your compliance reports from, it's about having that single pane of glass that gives you that visibility and kind of gets rid of that conflict that you often get, where you've got SCCM telling you one thing and maybe your antivirus is telling you another thing. It's actually, well, we want a single version of the truth. And on top of that, we're layering the sort of key compliance reports that you need to deliver on. So there's a big relevance to the toolkit. We're also automating all of the care certs. So yeah, more than half of the toolkit the dashboard can support. We're automating all of the care certs, making sure that your Microsoft patching is actually doing what SCCM or WSUS is telling you it's doing, but also actually monitoring those tools that we've already talked about today. So whether it's antivirus, ATP, encryption, making sure that they are fully installed, making sure that they're actually operational. So rather than relying on the ATP console to give you some assurance that that's doing what it should be doing, let's have something independent that's verifying that. And it's going to obviously support you in your progress, particularly towards things like Cyber Essentials Plus, because it's giving you the visibility that otherwise you might not have. Those are the key features. I'm actually not going to go through all of them right now because I'm conscious of time, but essentially the key part is this asset and inventory management. And then on top of that, we're layering the kind of threat feeds and the vulnerabilities, so particularly things like the care certs. So to show you that, this is a screenshot from the dashboard. We've got certain alerts here, like workstations without AV, machines which aren't encrypted, patching status. So all of this is derived from an agentless scan that's constantly seeking the latest asset information. This is basically a real-time view of your estate, so you can see where you're at and where your risks are. And all of this is kind of drillable, so you can click into those alerts and see the machines that don't have AV, see the laptops which aren't encrypted, see the devices which aren't being patched, see the care certs which are relevant to you. So this is our care cert compliance tab, I guess is the best word for it. Quite simply, everything on the left is red, everything on the right is outstanding. Everything on the right is green, and therefore kind of we call it resolved. So if you were looking at this to see where your risks are, you would concentrate on the left-hand side and see which care certs you might need to think about remediating. As you remediate them, they will shift over to the right and populate some trending graphs that will produce for you. So hopefully that makes sense. Obviously very high level. We also provide, as part of the service, some what we call monthly assurance reports. So this is then a board-facing report for those people that are more senior, that perhaps aren't looking at the live dashboard. This is how they'll consume the feed from the solution. Lots of clients out there now, so plenty of reference sites. I think we're up to about 30 live customers and plenty more in POC phase. So you'll find lots of case studies on our website, plenty of people out there that are willing to sort of share their experiences. And as I say, that was just intended as a very sort of brief introduction to the dashboard. If you want to know more, obviously I'd be very happy to do any one-to-one sessions. Tomorrow we're running a webinar at the same time, 2 o'clock, which is focused on this, and we also are putting on an event at the National Space Centre in October, which you'd be very welcome to attend. But that's all for today. I think we've pretty much used up our time slot. So thanks again, Roger, and thanks, Jonathan, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Roger. Good afternoon.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Bye-bye.